Allegedly shot and killed her husband was given a $50,000 bond in Jackson Municipal Court today. Police say around 11:30 yesterday morning, 30-year-old Rashawn Wallace shot and killed 33-year-old Damion Reed after he allegedly attacked her. It happened on Brook Hollow Drive in Jackson. Wallace is charged with murder.
It was a Sunday morning in Jackson, Mississippi, one of those mornings where the world seems to move at its own peaceful pace. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the neighborhood, and families across the city were waking up, preparing for another day. But in one house, what should have been an ordinary morning was about to turn into a nightmare that would leave everyone who knew them reeling. Damion Reed, a 33-year-old father, and his wife, Rashawn Wallace, seemed like any other couple. Their home was filled with the usual signs of love, family pictures, children's toys, and the kind of warmth that comes with years of shared experiences. Damion was known for his dedication to his family, his role as a father, and his unwavering loyalty to those he loved. Rashawn, a professional and a mother, had her own sense of care, her own life, and yet, within their seemingly happy home, tension had begun to mount. The morning began like any other, but it didn't take long for something small, seemingly insignificant, to spark a confrontation that would escalate far beyond what anyone could have imagined. What started as a disagreement, a misunderstanding about something as trivial as a social media request, quickly spiraled into a violent altercation. In a matter of minutes, this home, which once resonated with the sounds of family life, would be the scene of a tragic event that would forever change the course of their lives. What led to this point? How did a simple disagreement transform into an unspeakable tragedy? Was it a moment of blind rage, a desperate act of self-defense, or something deeper that had been building for years? And the most haunting question of all, how did it all unfold in front of their young child, whose life would be forever altered by the events of that day? As the details of that fateful morning begin to unravel, the story of Damion and Rashawn raises more questions than answers. What happened to this family, who had once seemed so full of promise? And was there anything that could have been done to prevent the unthinkable from becoming a reality? Welcome to Dark Trace Crime Stories, where we bring you the real stories behind the headlines. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss a case. And for those of you who've been here before, thank you for supporting stories that matter.
I was all in her gloves. I know from the way she screamed at me.
Damion Reed was born and raised in Mississippi, where family values weren't just tradition, they were the foundation of identity. Described by those who knew him best as soft-spoken but deeply committed, Damion grew up surrounded by the kind of Southern kinship that leaves lasting impressions on a person. He was the middle child in a tightly knit family and carried a quiet strength that earned him respect among his peers and reverence among his relatives. He wasn't a man who needed attention. His presence alone was enough to command it. Damion's greatest joy came later in life, when he became a father. From the moment his daughter entered the world, everything shifted for him. Friends say it was as though the world narrowed to a single purpose: protecting, guiding, and loving that little girl. His daughter was the light of his life, a bond that not even time or tension could loosen. He was present for every birthday, every school recital, every scraped knee. To Damion, being a father wasn't a role, it was his identity. And he wore that identity with pride. His relationship with Rashawn Wallace, the woman who would later become his wife, was intense from the start. They were drawn to each other with a kind of magnetic urgency. Friends say their chemistry was immediate, and at first, it looked like love in its purest form: laughter, shared goals, and a home filled with plans for the future. But as with many passionate connections, strong feelings didn't always translate to smooth dynamics. While Damion was undeniably devoted, his love came with boundaries that sometimes blurred into control. He had a jealous streak, one that he didn't always keep hidden. Those closest to him noticed how protective he was over Rashawn, always wanting to know where she was, who she was with, how long she'd be gone. To some, it seemed like care. To others, concern. But over time, it started to feel like tension building under the surface. Still, there was no denying that Damion wanted his family to stay whole. That much was clear. Family members describe him as a man who struggled at times with expressing his fears in healthy ways, but who never stopped trying. He worked hard, kept his circle small, and put everything into maintaining the life he had built. In the eyes of his daughter, he was a hero, someone who could fix anything with a reassuring word or a firm hug. That image is what makes his absence so difficult to bear. Because beyond the flaws, Damion was present. He showed up. He stayed involved. And now he's gone. His death left more than silence. It left confusion, questions, and a hole in the lives of everyone who loved him. Especially his daughter, who now has to navigate a world without the father who once centered her universe. There are no simple narratives when it comes to real people. Damion Reed was not perfect, but he was loved. He had his faults, but he was devoted. And in the end, it was this very complexity, the blend of tenderness and turmoil, that makes his story so heartbreaking.
Fine about a day, baby. What you waiting on? See, you gonna wait till I get real fine, and I'm gonna pay you no mind when I get real fine.
Rashawn Wallace was a woman many admired for her determination and strength. A registered nurse in Jackson, Mississippi, she built her career through long shifts, emotional labor, and the delicate balance of saving lives while also raising her daughter. Those close to her knew her as someone deeply nurturing, both in the hospital and at home. She didn't complain much, even when juggling 12-hour shifts with the demands of family life. If she was exhausted, she rarely showed it. Her focus remained on creating a stable home, providing for her child, and supporting Damion, her partner of over 10 years. Their relationship had not always been easy, but it had once been full of hope. When they first met, Rashawn was drawn to Damion's protective nature. He was affectionate, funny, and generous with his attention. For a while, it felt like a partnership where both were working toward a shared dream, raising their daughter in a loving, two-parent household. Rashawn, who had experienced her own struggles growing up, wanted to give her child what she hadn't always had: security, consistency, and the presence of both parents. But over the years, the tone of their relationship began to shift. Friends noticed that Rashawn didn't go out much. She turned down invitations. She stopped sharing as much online. Slowly, the bright energy she once carried seemed dimmed by constant negotiation, tiptoeing around Damion's reactions, soothing his growing suspicions, and avoiding anything that might set off a disagreement. At first, it was subtle, questions about who she was texting, or why she liked a certain photo. Then it grew into patterns, frequent arguments, accusations, and efforts to control who she spoke to, even virtually. One of the key triggers in their relationship had become Rashawn's social media use. For Damion, her online presence felt like a threat. He scrutinized her posts, questioned her likes, and resented the occasional comments from old friends or male acquaintances. What might seem trivial to others, interacting with a former classmate, accepting a friend request, became flashpoints in their home. It was a seemingly small action, just one friend request on Facebook, that lit the final fuse. In most homes, such a moment might have triggered a conversation, or at worst, a minor disagreement. But in theirs, it reopened old wounds: Damion's fears of betrayal, Rashawn's need for personal space, and the widening gap between love and control. Rashawn Wallace's story is not just one of conflict. It's one of a woman caught between loyalty to her family and the psychological toll of a relationship shaped by control. The events that followed didn't happen in isolation. They were the result of years of emotional erosion, silenced frustrations, and missed opportunities for healing. And when it all reached its breaking point, the consequences were irreversible. It was just after 10 a.m. on what should have been a quiet Sunday morning in Jackson, Mississippi, when the atmosphere inside the Reed Wallace home began to shift. What began as a routine start to the day, light conversation, a few minutes scrolling through social media, suddenly turned into something much heavier. A new friend request Rashawn had accepted the night before, from an old male acquaintance, was enough to spark yet another argument. For Damion, it wasn't just a harmless click. In his eyes, it confirmed long-held suspicions that Rashawn was keeping things from him, or worse, stepping out of the relationship. The argument escalated fast. Rashawn tried to explain that it was just someone she once knew, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. But Damion wasn't interested in explanations. His voice grew louder. Accusations started flying. He demanded to know why she felt the need to reconnect with anyone outside their circle, especially a man. She tried to de-escalate, tried to keep calm. Their daughter was home. But Damion's frustration had been building for weeks, maybe months. And now, it was spilling out into every corner of the house. According to Rashawn's later statement, things turned physical. She said Damion pushed her, tried to grab her phone, and blocked her path when she tried to walk away. At that moment, fear overtook reason. She didn't know what would happen next, but she could feel the shift, the kind where words were no longer enough, and where things could quickly move into a territory no one could take back. Rashawn went to the bedroom and retrieved a firearm that was kept in the home. She later told investigators she had no intention of using it, not unless she absolutely had to. It was meant to scare him, to get him to back away and give her space. She fired a warning shot into the floor. The sound was deafening. Their daughter, nearby, heard everything. But Damion didn't back down. He moved toward her again, shouting. And in that charged moment, adrenaline high, emotions raw, fear gripping every muscle, Rashawn fired a second shot. This one struck Damion in the chest. He collapsed almost instantly. The moment the shot rang out and she saw him fall, something shifted again. The panic that had once been rooted in fear turned into horror. She dropped the gun. She ran to him, began CPR, and pleaded with him to hold on. Her hands shook. Her voice cracked as she begged for him to breathe. Their daughter cried out from the other room. Rashawn called 911, voice trembling, telling the dispatcher that her husband had been shot, that she had shot him, and that he wasn't breathing. Emergency services arrived quickly, but by then, there was nothing they could do. Damion Reed was pronounced dead at the scene. The man Rashawn had built a life with, the father of her child, was gone. The home they shared was now a crime scene. Witnesses would later say they never imagined things between them could end this way. Friends knew about the arguments, the tension, the possessiveness. But no one expected a Sunday morning to end with a life lost and a family permanently shattered. What started as a disagreement over a simple online interaction had snowballed into a fatal confrontation. In the hours that followed, Rashawn was taken into custody. She cooperated fully with law enforcement, giving a detailed account of what had happened, her fear, the escalation, the shots. There was no attempt to hide what she had done, no efforts to cover anything up. But that didn't lessen the weight of it. A man was dead. A woman's life was changed forever. And a young girl had lost both of her parents in a single morning. The physical confrontation may have lasted only minutes, but its impact would echo far beyond the walls of that home. The unanswered questions, the emotional fallout, and the legal consequences were only just beginning. The news of Damion Reed's death rippled through Jackson with heartbreaking speed. For those who knew the couple, it was nearly impossible to comprehend. A young father gone. A woman, a nurse, a mother, now behind bars. And a little girl left in a silence she didn't ask for, her world cracked in half by a single moment. Shortly after officers arrived at the Reed Wallace home that Sunday morning, Rashawn was taken into custody. She didn't resist. There was no attempt to deny what had happened. Her voice was calm but shaking as she gave her initial statement, describing the series of events that led her to fire the gun. She made it clear she was afraid of being hurt, of things escalating even further, of not making it out of that confrontation alive. Still, it wasn't long before formal charges were filed. Rashawn Wallace was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The charge sent a wave of confusion and debate through the community. Many people wondered, Was this murder, or was it self-defense? In her account, Rashawn emphasized that she only wanted to protect herself. She didn't intend to kill Damion, only to get him to stop, to back away, to let her breathe. But prosecutors argued that firing a second shot after already firing a warning into the floor crossed a line. That in pulling the trigger again, Rashawn had made a fatal choice. The legal process moved slowly. Detectives reviewed statements from neighbors, friends, and relatives. They combed through the couple's history. It didn't take long for a pattern to emerge, one marked by love, yes, but also by deep-rooted tension. Witnesses described Damion as deeply committed to his family, but also increasingly controlling in recent years. He kept a close watch on Rashawn's social media accounts. He grew suspicious when she went out. He questioned her about conversations, phone calls, likes, and comments. And yet, there were no prior police reports of domestic violence. No restraining orders. No official signs that things had ever gotten physical, until that morning. That gray area became the heart of the case. Friends and community members were divided. Some mourned Damion as a loving father and husband who didn't deserve to die. They questioned whether Rashawn had other options. Why she didn't leave, why she didn't call the police, why she had a loaded firearm in the house. Others, however, supported her. They believed her when she said she feared for her life. They pointed to the emotional toll of being in a relationship clouded by jealousy and control. They argued that just because there weren't police reports didn't mean there wasn't fear. Rashawn's defense team began to build their case around that fear. They painted a picture of a woman pushed to the edge, not in one single moment, but over time. They acknowledged the tragedy of what happened. But they also asked the court to consider what it feels like to live in a home where love is conditional, where anger can turn sharp, and where leaving isn't always as easy as it sounds. Meanwhile, prosecutors remained firm. They emphasized that Rashawn had time to walk away, that she had gone to retrieve the firearm from another room, that she had chosen to fire, not once, but twice. The warning shot, they said, was a chance to stop everything. But the second shot ended a life. And for that, they believed accountability was necessary. The community kept watching. Online forums filled with debates. Some people recalled moments they'd seen Rashawn and Damion together, quiet dinners, school functions, brief conversations in the grocery store. Nothing that would have predicted this kind of ending. Others came forward quietly to say they'd noticed the tension. The way Rashawn seemed withdrawn. The way Damion always seemed to know where she was. It wasn't the kind of thing people reported. It was the kind of thing they remembered later. As the case moved through the system, Rashawn remained in jail, awaiting trial. She was denied bond, with the judge citing the seriousness of the charge and the need for more detailed review. Her daughter, now living with relatives, was receiving counseling. Family members on both sides were left grieving, confused, and broken. No one came out of that Sunday morning whole. The tragedy exposed more than just a single act of violence. It opened conversations about emotional abuse, about the warning signs people overlook, and about the complicated nature of self-defense in relationships where love and control coexist. Rashawn's case wasn't clean-cut. It wasn't open and shut. It raised uncomfortable questions. How do we define abuse when there are no bruises? When does fear become justifiable defense? And what does justice look like when both parties are victims of a situation no one truly understood? By the time the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Media outlets had picked up the story. Advocates on both sides filled the seats. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about how society views domestic conflict. About whether the justice system could handle the complexities that come with relationships that look stable from the outside, but feel like survival on the inside. And at the center of it all was a woman who said she only wanted to live. A man who would never speak for himself. And a daughter who would grow up with a truth no child should ever have to carry. When tragedy strikes within the walls of a home, the aftermath often forces society to look deeper, not only at the act itself but at the patterns that lead up to it. The case of Damion Reed and Rashawn Wallace is not just a singular incident. It's a lens into a much broader, far more widespread issue, intimate partner violence, often referred to as IPV. IPV is not always visible. It does not always show itself in bruises or broken bones. More often, it hides behind smiles in family photos, laughter at public gatherings, or the quiet routine of daily life. But underneath, it operates through control, fear, and emotional manipulation. At its core, IPV is not about anger, it's about dominance. In Rashawn and Damion's case, the warning signs were subtle but persistent. Jealousy, especially over something as seemingly small as a social media friend request, may appear insignificant to some. But in households affected by controlling dynamics, even the smallest perceived betrayal can ignite arguments that simmer just beneath the surface. Jealousy becomes toxic when it shifts from insecurity to control. And when that control is paired with persistent emotional tension and the looming presence of a firearm, the risk of violence becomes dangerously high. Damion's reaction to Rashawn's friend request was not just about mistrust. It was about the fear of losing control over a relationship he had become possessive of. Studies show that jealousy and emotional abuse are among the top predictors of intimate partner homicide. The presence of a gun in such relationships increases the likelihood of a fatal outcome by more than 500%. In homes where emotional conflict already exists, a firearm doesn't protect. It heightens the stakes of every argument. In this case, a verbal disagreement escalated quickly into a confrontation. Rashawn, feeling threatened and desperate, retrieved the firearm she and Damion kept at home. What followed was a fatal encounter that left one parent dead, another facing the justice system, and a child left without either in the immediate aftermath. These outcomes are not rare. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. Over the course of a year, that equates to more than 10 million women and men. And every day, more than 3 women are killed by current or former partners. The psychological impact of IPV extends far beyond the immediate victims. Children who witness domestic conflict, even if they are not directly harmed, carry emotional scars that can last a lifetime. Research shows that children exposed to IPV are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, behavioral problems, and difficulties forming healthy relationships later in life. In Rashawn and Damion's household, their child was spared physical harm, but the trauma of losing a father in such a violent way, and watching a mother go through legal consequences, is something no child should endure. The long-term consequences for this young girl remain unknowable, but the emotional cost is undeniable. What makes IPV so insidious is that it often builds slowly. It begins with small demands, checking a partner's phone, criticizing how they dress, expressing discomfort with their friendships. These behaviors are frequently dismissed or rationalized. But over time, they chip away at a person's independence, self-worth, and safety. Often, people stay not because they are blind to what's happening, but because they fear the repercussions of leaving. For some, leaving can be the most dangerous time. For others, they hope things will change, improve, or go back to how they used to be. But in households where power and control rule the relationship, change rarely comes without intervention, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. It's important to acknowledge that IPV does not always involve a single aggressor and a single victim. Sometimes both individuals are trapped in a dysfunctional pattern of behavior, marked by emotional dependence, distrust, and unresolved trauma. In those environments, violence becomes a symptom of deeper dysfunction, not a singular moment of rage. Damion was described as loving, protective, and devoted to his family. Rashawn was known as hardworking, nurturing, and resilient. But those positive traits existed alongside traits that created tension, jealousy, control, and unspoken resentments. In the end, it wasn't just one argument that led to tragedy, it was a long buildup of emotional strain that finally reached a breaking point. Understanding IPV means recognizing that not all violence is visible, and not all danger comes from strangers. Sometimes, it begins with love, but ends with fear. And in the worst cases, it ends with death. No family is immune to conflict. But the difference between an argument and a tragedy often lies in how that conflict is handled, and whether the people involved feel safe, respected, and heard. In this case, that balance was lost. And the cost was irreversible. The story of Rashawn Wallace and Damion Reed ended in irreversible tragedy. A young man lost his life, and a young woman now lives with the weight of a split-second decision that changed everything. But in examining stories like this, we are also given an opportunity to ask difficult questions, to reflect on the warning signs, and to explore the steps we can take as individuals, families, and communities to prevent similar outcomes. One of the most critical steps is recognizing early warning signs in relationships. Many instances of intimate partner violence do not begin with physical harm. They often start subtly, with jealousy, possessiveness, controlling behaviors, and a gradual erosion of personal boundaries. A partner who demands access to your phone, questions every social media interaction, or tries to isolate you from friends and family may not seem dangerous at first. But these behaviors can be early indicators of a larger pattern of control. In Damion and Rashawn's relationship, tensions had been building for some time. What began as love and admiration slowly became clouded by suspicion and frequent arguments. Disputes over social media were not just digital disagreements. They were symptoms of a deeper communication breakdown. Open, honest conversations about trust, privacy, and boundaries are vital in any relationship. When one partner begins to feel stifled, accused, or emotionally trapped, those feelings often fester into resentment or fear. To prevent escalation, couples need safe spaces for communication and conflict resolution. Professional support, such as relationship counseling, therapy, or peer mediation, can provide tools to de-escalate tensions before they become dangerous. In many communities, local organizations offer low-cost or free resources, including hotlines for people in distress, support groups, and family conflict intervention programs. But too often, individuals in troubled relationships feel shame or fear about reaching out. Normalizing mental health care and encouraging both partners to seek help when they sense recurring conflict can make all the difference. Another vital component of prevention is the safe storage and handling of firearms. In Rashawn's case, access to a gun turned a heated argument into a deadly confrontation within seconds. Even when a weapon is kept with the intent of self-defense, its presence can elevate a moment of fear into a life-altering tragedy. Firearms in homes should always be stored unloaded, locked, and inaccessible to anyone who may be experiencing emotional volatility or relationship conflict. Firearms safety is not just about responsible ownership, it's a public health issue, especially in households where tension exists. Prevention also means empowering victims, or potential victims, with legal protections and community support. Restraining orders, emergency housing, and victim advocacy programs can offer lifelines to those seeking to leave controlling or abusive situations. But for those protections to work, communities must be educated. Friends, neighbors, coworkers, and relatives must be alert to the signs of emotional or physical distress and know how to help someone navigate resources. Bystander awareness training and public education campaigns can reduce stigma and encourage proactive intervention before things escalate. Ultimately, this case, and others like it, highlight how deeply personal issues like trust, jealousy, and communication, when left unaddressed, can spiral into violence. But they also show us the power of early intervention and education. Young people especially should be taught about healthy relationships, consent, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution from an early age. Schools, faith groups, and community centers can all play a role in promoting respectful, supportive partnerships. No one can go back and undo what happened between Rashawn and Damion. But by learning from their story, we can move forward, better informed, more compassionate, and more committed to building a culture that doesn't ignore red flags or silence those in need of help. Prevention is possible, but it begins with awareness, education, and the courage to act before it's too late. In the aftermath of Damion Reed's death, the echoes of tragedy continue to ripple outward, reaching his family, friends, Rashawn Wallace, and an entire community left struggling with unanswered questions. A life was lost in the blink of an eye. A future filled with potential was cut short. And for those left behind, the pain doesn't fade easily. Damion's loved ones must now live with the memory of who he was and who he could have been. Rashawn, too, carries a lifelong burden, grappling not only with the legal consequences of her actions, but with the emotional weight of taking the life of someone she once loved. This story is heartbreaking, but it's also a powerful reminder of the very real consequences of unresolved conflict and the danger of silence in the face of emotional volatility. Damion and Rashawn's relationship, like so many others, was filled with moments of joy, affection, and hope, but also tension, insecurity, and breakdowns in communication. The inability to address these issues, to seek help, or to safely disengage from a dangerous argument ultimately led to an irreversible outcome. If there's one lesson to take from this case, it's the critical need for communication, mutual respect, and emotional awareness in relationships. Disagreements are inevitable, but when they become constant, when control replaces trust, or when fear starts to cloud love, it's time to pause and reflect. These dynamics don't just damage relationships, they can destroy lives. We must also acknowledge the broader issue this case highlights. Intimate partner violence is not always visible. It doesn't always come with bruises or broken bones. Sometimes, it manifests as emotional manipulation, jealousy, or the inability to walk away from toxic patterns. Recognizing these early signs can be life-saving. To those watching, if you or someone you care about is in a relationship that feels unsafe, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally, you are not alone, and help is available. Reach out to a trusted friend, a counselor, a hotline, or a support group. There are resources designed to help people navigate these complex, painful situations before they turn tragic. And for those witnessing someone else in crisis, don't stay silent. Check in. Speak up. Listen. It might feel uncomfortable, but a moment of courage could save a life. The story of Rashawn and Damion is a sobering one, but it doesn't have to be repeated. We can learn. We can educate. We can choose peace over pride, safety over silence, and help over hopelessness. Because at the heart of every headline like this one is a family shattered, a future lost, and a lesson we can't afford to ignore. At DarkTraceCrimeStories, share stories that demand justice, remembrance, and change. If this story moved you, like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications, because these are not just stories, they're lives. And they deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay aware.